Okay, let's start. So what I'm going to share with you are two sources. And these two sources, when we're going to look at them together, apparently somewhat contradict one another. Okay, so let's just take a brief investigation and look at the two sources. I want you to consider how these sources sit with you. Where do they fit into your experience of Tisha B'Av? Where do they fit into your experience of life? And how do we reconcile their connection with one another? Okay, let's have a look at the two sources. So the first source is a Gemara in Nedarim. It's a little less known, but you may have heard it. The Gemara says the following. Ravina Omer, Ravina says, what is the reason why the temple was destroyed? Why was the temple destroyed? The way that it's written here is that the Jewish people were punished. Why was it destroyed? And the Gemara tells us in Nedarim, she'ein mevarachim b'Torah tchila, because they never made a blessing on the Torah first. I mean, such a catastrophe, such destruction, such death, such anguish, all because of what? They never made the blessings on Torah first? What's going on here? Why is that such a significant concept? Why is that such a significant thing? That's why the entire temple was destroyed? So let's just open this up just briefly to try and understand what this source means. What does it mean that they didn't make the blessings on the Torah first? Richard, what's your understanding of this? How would you understand this verse?
Can you repeat the verse again?
Yeah, the verse says the reason why the temple was destroyed is because they never made a blessing on the Torah before their studies. Okay, so we know that there's a requirement to make Birkas HaTorah, that a person needs to make a blessing on the study of Torah prior to learning. And it says that the reason why the temple was destroyed was because they never made this blessing. Bit of a strange concept, no? I would think maybe because they didn't keep Shabbos, or because they didn't do this or do that. They didn't make a blessing on Torah. Raul, you've heard this before, this concept?
I think I have, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so any postulations, any outlooks here? Why do you think this is such a significant thing? Why would one, consider the destruction of the temple being befitting for such a seemingly incredulous, inaction or mistake or guilty engagement? Why is this so specific? Why is this so important that the temple is destroyed because of that? Okay, so let's actually give a bit more time to consider this. And I want to show you the next one. Okay, let's see the next source here. Okay, the next source, and that's the only two sources we're going to look at and try and understand how they fit together. And there's many manifestations of how we're going to reconcile these sources. This next source is much better known. And it says in the Gemara in Yuma, Mikdash Rishon, Mipnei Ma Chorav. Why was the first Beis HaMikdash destroyed? It says Mipnei Gimel Devarim, because of three things. Shahayaboy, because there were three things that took place in the temple, in the first temple. The first one being Avodah Zorah, Giluy Arayos, V'Shfichas Damim. The three cardinal sins: service of idolatry, Giluy Arayos, which is sexual immorality, and Shfichas Damim, which is murder. Okay, that we know. I'm sure we've heard of many times. Aval Mikdash Sheni, Shaya Oiskim Torah. Now listen to this. This is very frightening. The Mikdash Sheni, and it can be very much considered in a very deep way. The Mikdash Sheni, listen to what it says they did. They learned Torah. They had yeshivas. They sat down and engaged with the study of Torah continuously. Uva mitzvahs, and they did mitzvahs. Ugimlus chasadim, and they had the actions of chesed, of kindness, of tzedakah. Mipnei ma charav. Why was it destroyed? They had all of these amazing things. Mipnei shahaysa by sinas chinam, because they had sinas chinam, baseless hatred. We learn from this source, and the Gemara teaches us that the problem or the sin of sinas chinam, of baseless hatred, is of the equivalence of the three cardinal sins: murder, sexual immorality, and idolatry. Hectic. Now, what is sinas chinam? Sinas chinam is archetypally known as baseless hatred, just hating another. There's really never a reason to hate. We could disagree. We could have a difference of opinion. But hatred, sinas chinam, and this energy that comes into a person's life of negativity against others. But sinas chinam is also not known as its manifestation within baseless hatred of the self. I saw recently brought down the baseless hatred of oneself. There should be a concept of baseless love of deep connectivity to everyone, and deep connectivity and understanding of oneself. Now, these are the concepts of the second source here. Now, our job together is going to be to try and figure out what is the connection between these sources. If one was to read the sources, what we would encounter is something called a stira. A stira is a contradiction. It's a contradiction. It's blatantly a contradiction. I look at one source and it says that the reason why the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed was because they didn't make a blessing on the Torah first. And then I look at the second source and it tells me two other things: sinas chinam for the second one, and the shloisha chamuris, the three cardinal sins, for the first one. Can anyone suggest a way of reconciling the two sources together to understand that they are essentially the same? What would one suggest potentially within these frameworks? Gary, do you have any ideas here?
Well, it's just showing the importance and power of the Torah and the respect that one should give for it, and that everything is encapsulated in it. And if you don't walk that path, then negativity can come.
Okay, thank you. So you're saying that through making the blessing on Torah, you're essentially attributing the value of Torah itself. And as soon as you lose the value of Torah, then it can spiral into all other mishap and difficulties that are abrasive to one's existence in this world. Thank you for that answer. Very good answer. Any other potential suggestions, ideas? Jacques, you said something here which was quite powerful. For the sake of self, do you want to expound on what you've said there, Jacques?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Rabbi. All those three things are basically sins that you do for the sake of self. I mean, you want something for yourself, therefore you murder, you do sexual immorality, and then you can also study Torah for the sake of self, which is a bad thing. That it's for the wrong reason. It should be for the sake of heaven.
Excellent. Thank you, Jacques. Thank you. And a beautiful, beautiful answer, which I think comes to the core of this potential teaching. And there are many teachings that can come out of this comparison, but I think let's hone in on this concept, okay? What we have to understand is that there are many ways of doing things in life and many reasons why a person does things in life. And it seems that the primary reason as to why the Jews never made a blessing on Torah prior to its engagement was they viewed Torah as exactly as how you've described, Jacques, as an externality, as an identity, as something that a person could show off in terms of their knowledge, make themselves potentially feel better. You know, look, I'm learning, etc., etc. All different manifestations of externality through the study of Torah. And they somewhat perverted the experience of spirituality to a self-serving method. To make a blessing on something, means that I am tapping into its essence, that I do it for you, Hashem, that I do it to connect to you, Hashem, that I do it because there is something that strips me completely of all of the externality of me. And when they came along and made a blessing on Torah, that would contextualize their experience within the study of Torah, within their engagement of connecting to whatever infrastructure the Torah represented. By not making that blessing, they were perverting the Torah and saying, this Torah, it's all just for my identity. It's all for how much I know and how I can be perceived in the eyes of others. Now, it could be that we don't use Torah within that capacity within our own lives. But there are many other things that we could be considered of perverting within our experience of life, where life itself becomes an experience of competition, an experience of externality, an experience of fighting against another to assert oneself. And where a person loses that essence of life experience, of connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what it spirals out into are these shloisha chamuros. These three chamuros, these three attributes of really a systemic, of an empty self. A person comes to these three sins. So that's one additional connection that you've explained there, Jacques, which I think is very powerful for us to consider. And another teaching. So if we were to, and we'll end off with one final one, which will just take a couple of minutes so we can then go and daven Mariv just prior to the end of the fast. Andrew, I'll come to you just now. Let's just recap. So Gary said to us, it's a meditation that we can consider how important the Torah is. That we can come out of Tisha B'Av to really consider in our own lives the study of Torah. Engaging with the study of Torah itself is so important, so vital, so fundamental for our spiritual connectivity. The second concept that we understood here is not perverting our spiritual experience to that of an external force. That it's always internal, it's always there to humble the self, always there to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the blessing on the Torah represents that. Now, I'm not just taking the Torah for my own needs and stealing it, so to speak, for myself, but I'm going to use it to dissolve the self into a connection with Hashem. Andrea, before we go to the next one, what do you want to say?
Hi, yeah. And so like the three cardinal sins, idolatry, adultery, and bloodshed. So I learned once that those three things combined, it's Lashon Hara, basically. It's got the same effect of Lashon Hara. It creates a disconnection, a complete opposite of what the Torah is meant to do. And for us to be blessed with the Torah, with the understanding of it, and with incorporating it into our lives, we cannot speak Lashon Hara because it harms three people. It harms the person who speaks it, the one whom it is spoken of, and the one who receives it. And that's enough to disconnect you from the Torah, like in itself.
Yeah. And I think it's important to add there that it harms another individual. It essentially harms the self, because if we understand sinas chinam stems from the hatred of self. And Tisha B'Av is about building that inner temple, building that connection to the Torah, which is the inner self. And those things are inextricably linked. Yeah, so that's where Lashon Hara, that negativity to another, stems from that vacuum self. I want to share with you one final understanding of this, and then we'll conclude. This is based on a Kabbalistic understanding from the Maram Pano. Very, very, very unique understanding, but very deep understanding of what Tisha B'Av represents. Basically says like this. if you consider what the whole focus of Tisha B'Av is and where it finds its place in the calendar, you'll notice that Tisha B'Av finds itself right before the Yomim Noraim, right before Elul. Why is it that we have such a destruction, such a day of mourning, such a day of anguish right before the times of deep inspiration in Elul? And the Kabbalists bring down that it's one of the most fundamental experiences to go through in order to tap into one's Elul. And this is what they explain. We are mourning more than just the temple. What we are mourning today is the concept of Hashem's Malchus. Hashem's Malchus is Hashem's kingship. And Hashem's kingship is manifest in a number of ways. The first way that it's manifest is within the observance of the mitzvahs. Now, even when I say that, the observance of the mitzvahs, a person somewhat switches off. A person feels it's abrasive. What's the observance of the mitzvahs? You know, we feel disconnected from Hashem's Malchus. We don't feel, yes, we need to do the mitzvahs. We need to do this and that. A person, okay, I have to do it, I'll do it, you know. They don't feel inspired so much by it, Hashem's Malchus. If we understand that what took place with the temple is Hashem's Malchus, I mean, to do mitzvahs, it was so elevated. If you see these videos of these animations of the temple, you feel like you're a king doing Hashem's mitzvahs. Well, you don't feel that. We feel that it's so down in the ground, you know, it's in the afar. And what we do is we are mourning that Malchus, we are mourning that state of despondency, that state of disconnection. What we have to understand is one of the highest ways or the gateways to spiritual consciousness and connection to Hashem in the deepest ways starts off from seemingly the last place you think to look. And that is in accepting Hashem's Malchus, in accepting upon oneself the mitzvahs, in accepting upon oneself the fulfillment of the mitzvahs. That's one framework of Malchus. Another framework of Malchus, which is the final one, which I'll mention to you, is that Hashem runs this world. Malchus means Hashem's kingship. Hashem runs this world. And the general outlook that a person has when they come to the way that Hashem runs the world is they say to themselves, I'm not into it. I don't agree with how Hashem runs the world. I'm not happy about my circumstances. I'm not happy about the specific things that are taking place in my life in whatever framework or facet they may manifest. But the deepest spiritual gateway comes from accepting Hashem's Malchus, comes from saying, Hashem, I accept your circumstances and the way that you run the world. I fully enter into what you do. I don't understand it, but I accept it. And I thank you for it. I thank you for it. And the Maram Mepano brings something so beautiful. He says, listen to this. This was astounding. And this is what we'll conclude with this teaching. It says, when the Jewish people came to accept the Torah, it says, Hashem says, you either accept the Torah and that will be good for you. And if you don't, here is the mountain of Sinai. And I'm holding it above you. And there you will be buried. Yeah, we've heard that midrash before. It's brought down in the Gemara and Shabbos. That if you accept the Torah, good. If not, here you will be buried. Now listen to what the Maram Mepano says. Interestingly, the Maram Mepano was a Kabbalist. He was one of the only Kabbalists not to have a beard. He held that the beard actually shouldn't be there. So he would remove the hair of his face with the pillatory cream. He wouldn't have a beard, just an interesting caveat. But the Maram Mepano, a famous Kabbalist, shares the following. He says, if you want to accept the Torah, good. What that means is there are moments in life when we feel connected, we feel that we want to accept the Torah, we feel that we are able to accept the Torah, we feel that circumstances in life are perfect and we feel happy. Good. But if you're in a circumstance where you don't want to accept the Torah, here you should be buried under the mountain. And what looks like a threat is actually the antidote. He advises the following. He says, if you don't want to accept the Torah, which means you don't want to accept Hashem's Malchus, you don't feel like doing the mitzvahs, you're not in the mood, you're not spiritually elevated, you're not inspired. Or, God forbid, a person's circumstances for that moment, for that day, for that week, or for whatever extended period of time aren't how they feel they should be. And you feel like, gosh, I can't be in this space anymore. He says, you know what you should do? Bury yourself under that mountain. Accept yourself in that circumstance. Say, Hashem, whatever you want from me, I accept it. This is it. I'm not fighting it. I'm with you. I thank you for everything. I bury myself in it. I don't understand it, but I bury myself in not understanding. I'm not inspired. All right, I accept I'm not inspired and I'm there. When a person comes to that state of awareness, they essentially accept Hashem's Malchus. They accept Hashem's kingship in the deepest, deepest framework. And in that, they're able to then enter into Elul. They're able then to come into the state of deep awareness, deep connection. And I think this is the final interpretation that we can suggest, many other interpretations, which I'm sure you can come up with, between these two sources, that the reason why the temple was destroyed because we never made the blessing on the Torah. The blessing on the Torah is blessing the Torah, blessing Hashem's Malchus, blessing our circumstances, making a blessing on the situations that we are in and saying, okay, I need to be productive, I need to be proactive, I need to see what I can do, but I'm not going to create that negativity, that sinas chinam, that hatred that constantly pervades through life. I'm going to accept it and make a blessing on it. And I'm going to accept your Malchus through that. Through that, we enter into the deepest frameworks of spirituality. Through that, we enter into our temple. So my dear friends, thank you for joining us in the final moments of the fast. It should be the last Tisha B'Av that we have in Galus. We should sit together. We should stand together, celebrating coming Mashiach in the third temple. And until then, God willing, it should be soon. We should build that inner temple that we have. And I thank you for joining us. It should be with bracha for everyone. Enjoy the breaking of your fast and hope to see you tomorrow for a pre-Shabbos L'chaim. All the best, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Uh,
Shkar.